Did I go now?
I'll get Ron to introduce you.
Oh, okay.
And then, all right, wait a second. Okay, here we go.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome. Today we are on Camaragal lands. I'd like to acknowledge elders past, present, emerging on the continued custodianships on the lands and waterways in which we are passing through today. Before I get Ron to introduce today's brown bag speaker, on the tables curated for you is matcha green tea, fudge with a dash of cacao powder. Three types, Rocky Road with three types of chocolate infused with mint, as well as a matured plum pudding. There is also cheese and chives scones, lemon tarts, fruit mince pies, and as I said, for the healthy, there is apples on the side as well.
There you go, Taryn.
Thank you, thank you. Now, without further ado, today is a double header for the brown bags. I'll get Ron to introduce our first speaker. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for coming. It is my privilege and pleasure to welcome Professor Robert Tighe here today to talk to us about lots of things to do with AI, I assume. Robert heads up our Centre of Excellence in STEM research here at ACU. He's an expert in all things AI, things I just do not understand. So we have a lot to learn from him. He's also great at egg launching. You can ask him about that later. And he's working with a number of staff here on using AI to develop innovative interventions, including a new one with robots on preschool literacy, numeracy, science, and also with Jessie on career education with a robot teaching career. So it's really, and most importantly, people, Rob has seen the light and has joined IPPE as our new affiliate wise decision. So we're very pleased to have you here today to learn from your wisdom, Rob, and to enjoy learning more from your expertise. So please join me in welcoming Rob. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation to be here today. So I'm here to talk a little bit about generative AI. There are a lot of different forms of AI. I'm going to focus on generative, and I'll add a few words at the end about agentic, but frankly, I don't really know very much about agentic right now. Still working on it. All right, so let's go through this. This is an unusual presentation because I'm going to ask you to actually go and get your phones. So if you have your phone with you, or if you have a computer with you, that's fine too. So open up, you're going to need some kind of electronic device to work. Normally, they tell you in presentations, you're supposed to put these things away, but I'm going to encourage you to pull yours out and have it ready to go. Okay. So I would like to actually have you on your phones during the presentation. I know that sounds weird. Okay. So let's go for this. You know, generative AI has only been out for a few years. As a matter of fact, it will be, I believe, 3 years in about a week, right? On the 30th of November, ChatGPT was widely released to the public. And that started changing things. And there have been massive leaps in what the capacity of AI can do in the past 3 years, that now it's almost unrecognizable. I mean, when it first came out, we were just happy to see that, wow, we can be conversational with it. Now it can identify pictures and faces, and it can draw things. It can create individuals who don't exist that now can speak to you and have conversations with. So there's so much that's happened in the last 3 years. It's moving at light speed pace. And it's basically, it's pretty amazing if you think what it's capable of doing. Now, large language models are a subset of AI. And that's what I'm going to start talking to you about today. And that's the primary focus, is the use of large language models. And, you know, what it actually means if you were to use large language models to do research. All right, so bear in mind, you know, a large language model is something that uses text and focuses on text. It doesn't have any recognition of images or things like that. It is primarily centered on text. Now, it's the capacity to identify concepts. It has the capacity to locate particular sentiments within text. And so it comes across as, I guess, almost alive. Okay. So now, this is where I want you to start. Now, I'm going to say stuff and you might have questions about it. I want to encourage you to ask those questions immediately. Okay? You don't have to raise your hand. You don't have to do anything. Just ask your question. I'm perfectly serious. I work better when it's conversational. If I'm here just saying stuff to you, to me, I just sort of get lost because I don't know how you feel about what I'm saying. Okay? So talk to me. Okay? If I say something you don't agree with it, talk to me. All right? It won't throw me off. As a matter of fact, I work better in those circumstances. All right. So anyway, look this article up. Just type in TAI LLMQ. Did you find the article? Okay. This is an open access article. It explores the use of large language models as a research tool for people who do qualitative research. It's intended to help provide confirmatory data for coding. I don't know how many of you in here do qualitative research, but those of you who do qualitative research understand what coding is, right? The idea that, you find something within the data, you code it. In other words, it's a sentiment, it's an idea, it's a concept of some kind. You name the code, you define the code, you go through your data looking for the code in the instances of the code as a researcher, right? You identify those points, you interpret those points, and that's a big part of the research you carry out. But the next layer of the research is to provide a confirmatory analysis of that. In other words, you need another researcher to go and look at this work, right? And they are going to offer their opinion about whether or not they agree with your assessment of it. So what we proposed here is, can you use AI to provide that second layer, that confirmatory analysis, and what would it take to provide that confirmatory analysis to do that? Would it be a time savings? Probably, because finding another researcher to go through your work and do all that, that's very time consuming. Finding an undergrad or a graduate student that you can hire and help you out to actually perform an AI analysis of this, much less onerous in terms of the resources. Okay, so let's take a look here. What we have, or how this work began, was we took a look at existing data that I had from previous studies, and this is all spelled out in the paper, and we looked at 5 concepts, 5 codes. These are the 5 codes: autonomy or self-motivation, persistence, perception of researcher identity, desire to create novel knowledge, and interest in engaging in research in a STEM-related discipline. So those are the concepts that we're looking for. Okay, and we define them according to these codes here. Is there a laser associated?
Yes.
Yep, there you go, right there. So autonomy, persistence, perception of identity, novelty, and STEM interests. So that's how we name the codes. And so then we go to the next step, which is creating a prompt that would go into the large language model. And so we prompted the large language model, and we put in the section of the data that we wanted confirmation on. And we perform these analyses. Now, when you do this, you're going to get an answer. Let's say the answer is no. Didn't find some of these codes. Then what do you do?
Refined it. You refine what you're looking for.
You refine what you were looking for. let's stop here for a second and think about what AI actually is and what it actually does. So rather than going through and changing your prompt, what if you logged out, logged back in to your AI, resubmitted the same prompt? Would you expect to get the same identical or same answer? Yes or no? I see a not so sure in the audience. And that's right, not so sure. You have to do, it depends on the initial, when you log in, there are initial settings when you log in, and it determines a series of what I call presets in the large language model that you're using. Those presets determine to a large extent which way the model will lean. And sometimes you'll have a concept that sits right on the cusp of that. And it could go either way in terms of its response. So what we did here is we put in a text, right, that was an extract from an interview, and we asked for it to look for these codes. And let's take a look at, so what I just talked about is a zero-shot analysis, right? You put in that prompt one time and you get a response. Do you stop there? And the answer is no, you don't stop there. For that particular example that's in the paper that you just downloaded, here are the results that we got. You can see that with 5 log in, log out in submissions of those prompts, that for autonomy, 1 out of the 5, we got a thumbs up, and 4 other times we got a thumbs down. This is the identical prompt entered 5 different times. And the process is that you would log in, enter the prompt, get the response, record it, log back out. Log back in and do it again. Enter the prompt, get the response, record it, log. So we did this 5 times and you see came back 1 out of the 5. We did it 10 times, 3 out of the 10. We did it 20 times. There you go. Do you see how that goes? We're getting a percentage here. And so by the end, you can see after 160 iterations of this, that we got a thumbs up about 30% of the time, no thumbs down about the other, about 70% of the time. So you can see how that goes, right? So when you ask a large language model to analyze a series of prompts for you on a conceptual basis, it's really important as a researcher to determine the statistical basis of that response back to you. And so this is the reason why we created this concept of a large language model quotient. We want it to be as simple as possible, right? What is an LLMQ? Large language model quotient is simply the number of times you get a positive response saying that we found this concept divided by the number of times you asked for it to find that concept. Does that make sense?
Nice. So
Yes, please.
what you're talking about here is model temperature, the extent to which the model allows itself to choose randomly.
Right,
Now you're doing that through the ChatGPT interface,
right.
which by definition allows OpenAI to vary the model temperature
That's right.
based on what it thinks it wants you to do, which is different from random number generation.
You see,
So,
the reason, no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
well, what I was going to say is, if you wanted to determine how consistent the model is, you have the power to do that. You just turn the model temperature. Like OpenAI makes all of this available to you. Why not pursue that rather than multiple iterations of the same?
So the reason why we do multiple iterations of the same thing is we want to enter a degree of randomness associated with the analysis of this. Yeah, we don't want to over control this, right? The idea here is that we have the sum of human knowledge being put into the large language model, and the large language model being trained on that, right? Once it's trained on that, then as researchers, we want to go in and we ask the question, we found this particular concept, or we found this idea in this text, right? And now we turn to the large language model that has the sum of human knowledge to some degree in it. Do you agree with our conception of that? Do you agree with our assessment? And so there is a degree of randomness associated with that, right? Because that's what you're doing. You're asking sort of broadly, right? Humanity, are you likely to find this? If we control the temperature, that's over controlling that process, right? You can narrow the temperature, you can broaden it. So by logging in and logging out, there's a degree of randomness associated with what the temperature is preset at when you log in. Does that make sense?
It does. I guess the reason why I'd be concerned about that is that you take away from many of about the way, well, you're entering a degree of, if you're saying, okay, we gave the model this prompt 160 times and 30% of the time it says yes, 70% of the time it's getting no.
Right.
We start to think, okay, 70% of the time it's going to get it right. But that depends on the model retaining the model temperature each time. As in, the next time someone logs in and uses it, at that model temperature, and if this was a statistics program, and I said every time you log in, it's going to change the answer that's issues, you'd be able to be wary of that, and you'd probably rather submit the prompt with a high model temperature and know that you'll get a more deterministic answer.
So your argument actually, we're taking advantage of what it is you're concerned about. Okay, we want to have that variation in temperature. We want to have this sort of, because if you go person to person to person, and each person will have their own temperature in terms of their interpretation of this kind of data, right? Do they agree with it? Do they disagree with it, right? And so this notion of putting into a large language model and have a variation in almost a random sense, right? Is if you do enough, you get an overall trend. And you see what's happening here in terms of this data. You do enough and you get an overall trend for where it's falling out, right? And you can see for the data that we put in, the best it gets is this idea of 60%, right? The other data is much lower than that. And so that's suggesting to us is you're not finding those codes in this example of the data, right? Most of the time it isn't going to be in there, right? So you can't rely on that. Now we're going to go a little further, right? But it's the idea of using this variation in temperature to your advantage, because the notion is, if I say this code exists in this text, would people writ large that read this in my journal article agree with me? And that's the context that we're entering this prompt into the large language model and how it's being trained. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, good deal. All right, so you can see from this now, what I want you to do is you can, large language models are actually, they're around. You can find them, right? What I would encourage you to do is bring up a web browser on your phone and type in the term Hugging Face. Just search Hugging Face right here. Okay, when you search Hugging Face, you'll start. It'll bring up this little browser or this little website here, and you can see that there'll be a list of various things, and each one of those things is actually an open source large language model that's been dinked around by somebody. They'll tell you the history of it. Herb, yes.
Just a question on your last example.
Sure.
First of all, do you have to log on and log back off? Because when I ask AI to do things in the same session, it gives me different answers.
Yes, and here's the beauty of this whole thing, okay, is it important to log on and log completely back out? And the answer to this is yes, it is. And it has to do with this notion of a pseudo random number, right? When people invented large language models, they wanted it to be conversational. They wanted these models to sound and feel like you're talking to a person. And a person never gives you exactly the same answer twice when they're chatting to you. Even if you ask them the same question, there are always some variations in that. And so there's a degree sort of randomness, of uniqueness to the responses, and that's built in to the large language model. And that's based largely on this something called a pseudo random number that's selected when you log in. Now, you can't have an actual random number on a computer. It's not possible because of the determinism on a digital platform, right? But you can create this very long list of 12-digit numbers and have those be random, quote unquote. And that's what we call them pseudo random. And so what happens when you log into ChatGPT or you log into Gemini or whatever you log into, it'll choose from a list of pseudo random numbers, and that will set a lot of different items as you go in, and it'll actually make a determination. We'll talk in greater depth in a minute about that, but that's the reason why you need to log all the way back out and log in. Yes.
The other question was, is there an issue with the problem of your definitions? If you had given it better definitions, more detail as to what it was and what it wasn't, would it have done a more consistent job of finding or not finding things?
So bear in mind here is that when you're a qualitative researcher, you define things the way that you see fit to define them, right? And this is how you're moving forward in your analysis. There could be always arguments from other researchers you didn't find it narrow enough, but that's what you chose, and that's how you decided you wanted to write your paper. And so what large language models allow you to do is actually explore that particular choice, or those research choices you make as an independent researcher, to explore that using a broad array of human knowledge.
I was thinking more like what you do in a meta-analysis. Where you get in a meta-analysis, if you use that concept in a meta-analysis, you'd have a whole long list of things that it was and it wasn't.
Yes.
And I would guess that would give you much more consistent results.
It may, but to some extent, something to bear in mind is that qualitative research is fundamentally a researcher-based type of approach to analysis. And so individualized to that researcher, and it's incumbent upon that researcher to clearly explain themselves and to offer the data that confirms their findings. And so to a large extent, it's fundamentally different from a meta-analysis. In other words, it's kind of mixing the methods that way. But I can understand where you're coming from. Okay, so you can see here is that, you can download a large language model. You can have it on your computer. What do you do with it? You can actually train it. You can train it using data that's available from something called the Common Crawl. Are you guys familiar with the Common Crawl? So I see some nods and some people say, so the Common Crawl, you nod your head. What is the Common Crawl?
Similar to what we- oh, it's a-
So another way of saying it, the way that I would say it, that is not as proper as the way that you say it, is it downloads the internet. It downloads the freaking internet, cleans it up, probably takes a lot of the porn out of it, which, reduces the size substantially, right? And then, offers it broadly available for researchers to use. It's a foundation that does it. My understanding is about once a month, it'll offer a new data set. Okay, you have these large training sets that are built for ChatGPT, that are built for Gemini, that are built for Claude, all these different, that they primarily started with Common Crawl data. They probably augment with Common Crawl data. You can actually pull down Common Crawl data and use that if you want. So it is freely available. So this is what they do is so you have a large language model and you have a training set that you basically can use, okay? Now, how many of you here are familiar with something called Word2Vec? Have you ever heard of it? So I also see, so I'm going to stop. But I'm just going to go ahead and say it. So here's this idea, look. Large language models are computers taking text and apparently reasoning with it, or appearing to reason with it, right? And produce a response to you. So you put in a prompt and it gives you back something that sounds like it understood what you said. How does it do something like that? The computers are fundamentally ones and zeros in terms of what it is they have in their brains, right? So how do you get from these words on a page to the ones and zeros? And so search for the term embedding projector. Can you see this right here? Okay. Once again, this is also something broadly available. Anybody can find it. Has everybody found that? Okay. So what I would like to ask that you do is you take your cursor and you put it on one of these dots in here. It'll say Word to Vec 10K. And then we'll have this, and this thing should be spinning. It should be in motion. Just take your cursor and put it on one of those dots. What do you get? Get a color, should get a word. Yeah, you see all those? There are a lot of words in there, right?
Yeah.
All right, so each one of these dots represents a word. Based on this label over here, Word to Vec 10K, 10,000 words. All right. This is a three-dimensional projection of an n-dimensional space. What happens is that when you train a large language model, what you're getting that large language model to do is to convert the text into a series of vectors that are in turn into a series of matrices that are in turn into a series of layered matrices, which are known as tensors. And then you intersperse those tensors with one another and connect those tensors with one another, which then becomes an n-dimensional tensor. So imagine doing this. If you are, this is just a, a thought exercise. Imagine that, you wanted to train a computer and you wanted to start by basically saying, look, what is the most likely word to follow another word? So then what do? You go and you pull a document, right? And you measure the distances between words. Okay, so the first word's distance to the word right after it is 1. And then the word after that, right, would be 2. So the distance from the first word to the third word is 2. The distance to the first word to the fourth word is 3, et cetera, et cetera. Then you go to the second word and measure distances front to back. And the positioning matters. And you collect all this data and you put it in a series into a vector. And then you go to the next document and you collect information about that, and it becomes another vector, and you line all these vectors up, and then you layer all these vectors on top of one another because there are a lot of different documents that you're using. That becomes a matrices, right? And then from the matrix, you have different data, right? Different categories of data that you want to keep track of, and that becomes layered matrices, and so you have these sheets of numbers that sit one on top of the other, and then you have another dimension you want to keep track of. Right? And that adds another set of connections. And so the number of connections can be quite large. And that's the reason why we call it n-dimensional. All right. So what you have here is that information that is in n dimensions that we cannot perceive as human beings. We just can't understand n dimensions. And all of that has been summarized into 3 dimensions, 3 components. This is the reason why, if you look down here, you will see PCA. And the PCA stands for something that you're probably very well aware of. It's principal component analysis. So it's performed a principal component analysis to isolate the 3 principal components, and then it's just taken those words and projected it into this 3D space so that we can see it as people. So does that make sense so far? So you can actually put the cursor on here, rotate that thing around. Now, let's imagine, what if you were to take all the words in the English and project it onto here, what would that look like? If you go here, you see this little down arrow right there? You click on the down arrow, a pull down menu will produce itself. You will see Word to Vec all. And click on that. What do you get? It's an immensely dense cloud, right? You get kind of the same basic image, but it is just thick, so thick with words that you can't see through it anymore, right? And this will, I believe it was 271,000 words are represented in that model. So it's pretty big, and that's the reason why it's taking a while for it to load. But you can rotate around through it, you can see it. So what the program, the application Word to Vec did was it allows you to create this kind of system, to create a system to where you convert words in a document into a vector. Okay, vectorizing it, then matricizing it, and then tensorizing it, right? And creating these sort of interwoven tensors that allow you to make decisions. Now, this is only part of the problem here, okay? That you have to choose that next word, but the next word can sometimes lead you sort of down a path that it's not where you started. And that was a problem with the initial large language models that were created, right? You would put in a prompt and it would start off giving you a great answer, right? And about 300 or 400 words into it, it would sort of like wander off into the woods. It's kind of like a dog that smelled something in the woods, right? It's like they're on the path, they're following the path, but then they sniff something and then, they're off in the woods. You don't know where they are. The response you get doesn't really make sense. It's not back to the original thing that you're starting with. All right, that's a problem. Okay. And so they struggled with this for a while until they actually came up with an interesting solution. I'll talk about that in a minute, but keep that in mind as you're going forward with this. You can use this program, right? Word to Vec. You can use it to analyze different, you can use it to look at different things. Now, when you hit this pull down menu, you notice they had about 4 choices there. Now, let me see if I see what those choices are. If you could hit the second choice, which is MNIST, click on that one, see what you see. What do you see there? You should see a cloud of handwritten numerals. You see the cloud of handwritten numerals? Okay. This works so much better when you're doing it in front of yourself, because then you get to manipulate it any way you want, right? Okay. That cloud of handwritten numerals, you notice that they're grouped together in certain ways. There are distances between them. And so in other words, what you can do is you can actually use this application, right? This approach to things, this training of large language models to categorize and cluster information. You can actually allow it, or you can actually use it as an analysis tool, because basically that's what this is doing. Is it's taking these handwritten numbers and it's putting them next to other numbers that are close by, because that's what people said. It's like this 6 is the same as that 6, and that's a 6, right? And these over here, these are all 1s. And there's some disagreement in this, and so this is the reason why you see differences in how. So when you see something, on your computer, it's asking you to identify something, or and it's like we don't want to see if you're human, and here, where are the bicycles, that kind of thing, right? And there's all these different pictures of bicycles, and you're selecting all these. They take that data and they sell it, because that's a picture of a bicycle. Okay, and so now you have the ability, or your computer is being trained on the ability to recognize different objects. Okay, so you can see what happens here with this. This is where your computer can understand text. It doesn't understand text, actually. It's just doing a math problem. Does that make sense? Right? I've seen these stories about young people who engage with an AI, and it seems like the AI understands them and is responding. And the AI is solving a math problem, and it's giving you the results, and that's what it's printing out in front of you.
Don't talk of that. You analyze his new best friend. Don't mention it.
I'm going to leave that alone. That is above my pay grade. Okay, so now, remember just a few seconds ago, I was talking about this idea where AI can go down, and start giving you an answer and it just loses itself, right? It gets lost along the way. There's a solution to this that were invented by these researchers and talked about in this paper. It's called Attention is All You Need. You should look this paper up. I've read it 6 times. I do not understand it. I mean, I understand parts of it. I'm not totally idiot, but I've read it 6. I don't have the depth of knowledge to be able to pick through it and understand it deeply. But the gist is this, is they've created a new form of large language model. It's called a transformer. And the transformer is the large language model type that all Chat, GPT, Gemini, all of those large language models that are available for public use right now are based on. They are all transformers. Transformers have the capacity to take knowledge and cluster it when you train it. And then from that information about the clustering, make the mathematical calculations to give you a response based on the prompt that you put in. Those distances between the words are determined by the documents that are written by people. So that information is there. And so what AI has done is it's summarized human knowledge and crystallized it into the form of metrics that are housed in the n-dimensional tensors that these large language models use, developed through their training to give you the responses to the prompts that you put into. Does that make sense? Questions? Okay. Yeah, download it. It's a fun read, even though probably after, 600 or 700 words, you'll be like, wait a minute, I got to go back. I kept doing that. I'd read a little, wait a minute, I got to go back. Okay. So here's another analysis, and this is the point that was brought up earlier, right? And when you log in and you put it in there, what if you were to put in the prompt that I talked about at the beginning of this talk, right? And then you had something that you believed very strongly that those codes were in. What would that data look like? Because you're a researcher, you've read this text, you identified this code inside the interview, and you want to know whether or not there's confirmation of this. And so we identified text in this, right? So we provided, the first example is we didn't really find it. We want to see how chat would respond, and it didn't seem to find it consistently, right? In this second one, this example here, this is actually the third text example, right? Right here in the paper that I asked you to download. We actually were fairly confident that we found these notions there. And these are the results that we got back. You see this right here. These are all ones. Right? That means we entered the prompt 5 times and it came back positive all 5 times. We entered it 10 times, all positive. We entered it 160 times, all positive. For the concept of autonomy, do you see how that all goes there? Right? For this last one, STEM interests, not consistently there. What does this look like? If you graph it, it looks like this. They're all bunched up there. So as a qualitative researcher, we recommended in this paper that you report the LLMQ to your readers. and you tell them the number of iterations that you put it through to calculate your LLMQ. And so then that way the reader can basically make their judgment on the quality of the confirmatory analysis that you're providing. Does that make sense? Okay, so in other words, what we're doing is we're converting a qualitative analysis into a more quantitative or more quantitatively reflecting the likelihood of a general agreement on the existence of a particular concept in the data.
Why is STEM interest still so low?
What's that?
Why is STEM interest still so low compared to?
Yeah, it just wasn't in that quote. Yeah, the quote that we chose didn't have STEM interest expressed in it. I mean, in the interview, it actually is in there. It's just not in that particular quote. And the quote was pretty substantial. You'll see if you read the paper. It was probably about 300 words. Okay, something like that. But it just didn't happen to be in there. But the other concepts were there. And that's the reason why the quote was chosen for this exam. Okay, so I want to talk to you a little bit more about, research and the integration of AI into research. We have a proposal for the development of a research facility at the STEM Center. Now, we want to combine various forms of data into an interwoven sort of a cascading form of data collection that allows you to answer questions as they arise based on what people are doing. Okay, so this setup that's pictured right here is actually at the Copernicus Science Center. It's in Krakow, Poland. I have a collaborator that I work with there. Their setup here is literally, you can see it's a practical space for secondary school students. And so you see all the lab benches and all this. They actually have microphones in the ceilings. Okay, and you can see here, this is actually behind these, half silvered mirrors are actually the control room. So there's computing back there and the researchers are sitting back there. Now, what it does is it captures data from 4 different angles. Okay, so this is the facility in Poland that I'm talking about. And you can see right here, this is exactly the same moment. So you can see this young woman right here in this sweater. She's off screen over here, but you can see her back here if you look beyond here. So here's this young man here in this dark sweater. He's right here. Okay, so you see it's video captured from multiple angles on what the students are doing. Right? And there are ceiling mounted microphones. There are some limitations to this experimental setup. Do you know what some of the limitations might be?
Ethics.
Since this is the center and all those students are, signed up to be there, then they kind of got past that. So actually they passed all that.
They didn't have ACU ethics.
Once again, above my pay grade. In terms of this, we ran into some serious challenges with this particular study. One of them is you notice that you really can't see what people are doing on the benches. Right, you don't know what they're manipulating. The other thing is the audio, since the microphones are ceiling mounted, was muddy. Lots of different voices, different directions. People are moving around, so there was it was difficult to capture data on individuals' movement. Right, you'd have to really watch the video and track this one person as they moved in. Watch the video again and track another person's movement. It was all of these different things are a challenge. And so in order to address this kind of thing, you have to address the idea of muddied audio or mixed audio from different people all at the same time, and also cameras that don't give you a line of sight of what people are doing. And then on top of that, collect data on positional tracking. Now, positional tracking does exist, right? We have equipment that does that. So you're able to do that. So you can imagine, I'm sorry, right here, you can produce heat maps based on individuals' movement and their positioning within a room. So what we're proposing to do in the STEM Center research facility is to combine external video with individualized person to person or per person audio to capture what each individual is saying, with positional tracking, and this final step, which is eye gaze. So to provide each of the participants in this research scenario a set of goggles that will track what they're looking at. So how many of you in here have worked with eye gaze data before? So you work with it.
I had it demonstrated.
So this is from a paper that I did actually many years ago. Eye gaze has been around for a while. Back when I did this research, it wasn't a robust mobile technology. Now it is a robust mobile technology. But the data I want to show you here shows its potential. Okay, so let's have a look. Over here, what participants were asked to do, two participants, Jen and Kirk. Okay, and you can see right here, this is their task. You are to ask this question about the relationship between vapor pressure and temperature. And here's Jen's behavior, and here's Kirk's behavior. What do you notice here about Jen's behavior in comparison to Kirk's behavior? Let me explain. When a person's eye moves, it's called a saccade, and that's represented by these colored lines. When a person's eye comes to rest, that's called a gaze point. That's represented by these black dots. Each of those black dots has two numbers on them. The first number is the order number. Is the 4th, 5th, 100th, 200th black dot. The lower number is the amount of time an individual spends staring at that particular point. And so you can see Jen didn't spend very much time looking at these responses. She spent much more time here on that response. You notice Kirk, it's on this one, this one, this one, and this one. You see the difference in their behavior. If you're an expert on these concepts here, which are chemistry concepts, which one would you expect? What would be the expert behavior? I would guess that it would be this one. Because the expert would ignore, it would look at, right, and immediately decide yes on it, right? They would look at correct response after having read it, chosen the response, and then left. C is the correct response. You can see here, you're not an expert, you're trying to answer the question. There's some struggle associated with that. Now let's go to something else. Here's another question. You notice this is a physics question about wavelength. Notice here, right here, the density of dots. You see the difference in the density. So right here, Kirk zips through the question, looks at the diagram, makes a choice, and leaves. If I were to ask you in the previous slide, example 1, who was the expert in chemistry, Jen or Kurt? Which one would you say?
Jen.
Jen. If I ask you the same question, who's the expert in physics, Jen or Kurt? Kurt. Do you see the difference? So eye gaze offers some important information about an individual's behavior based on the task that they've been given. As expertise develops, we believe that there is a change in individuals' eye gaze behavior. And so you can use this as a method for examining differences in how people look at things as they develop more facility with those different tasks that you're giving or you're giving them in different research scenarios. So you can imagine for different types of scenarios, we were actually interested in healthcare scenarios in terms of nurses that are looking at different monitors and how, you know, they look through the different monitors to understand what's going on with a particular patient, especially at handover. Okay. Also, we've talked to, you know, aviation people who are interested in pilot training, because how pilots look at what pilots look at in terms of the control panel that's in front of them when they're flying is important. So gathering information on these different things. And so, yeah, there we go. So in the STEM Center, we are proposing to bring together all of these different devices from individualized audio to position tracking, to video tracking, to eye gaze. Here's the individual audio right here. All of these different formats. And then to overlay all of these formats on a software backbone. So in other words, we would have all of this information available to a researcher to scrub through like you're scrubbing through a video, to the position where you're interested in looking at, and then having all of these different channels available and have the capacity to skip through these different channels as you're doing your analysis. Yes.
How do you get the eye gaze for people walking around the room at the individual levels? Because the types I've seen, and it's always against the limited thing example I thought was.
Yeah, they literally have these little crazy goggles. And then have there's a wire that goes down to a little transmitter that's in their back pocket or in their vest pocket. So and it records that data and you're able to overlay it. So it's a combination both of having the software that has capacity to be able to do this, and we are currently in negotiations with someone who has the capacity to do this, and also to bring to bear all of this all of these data collection devices. The last step in all this, and this is the reason why the AI is important in this conversation, is you can imagine the massive data that's going to be coming from a single implementation of this. If you have a large language model, generative AI, that's trained or it has the capacity to analyze this data, you can actually have it search through all the transcripts looking for the coding. When we originally produced the paper that you downloaded, that was a little over a year ago, a year and 3 months ago. The progress that large language models have made in that amount of time has meant that when we originally used it, it had the ability to analyze up to 500, 600, 700 words at a time, and we would feel confident in that. Now it has capacity to analyze tens of thousands of words. And so you would be able to take an individual's audio, feed that into the AI and look for particular circumstances, words, notions, concepts, expressions of emotions, something that you're interested in searching for, and find the time code for each one of those. And then you as a researcher could to basically scrub to where the position is for that information and look at multiple channels of data to figure out what that individual is saying, who they're saying it to, what they're looking at, and what the context of that activity is based on. So you have all of this information, this multimodal data collection. We call it combined data analytics. So you would be able to combine all these different forms of data. So a final word here about this. It appears that beyond generative AI, which is when you put a prompt in and you ask AI for something, it responds to you. The next step is for AI to think ahead of you. In other words, anticipate needs, anticipate questions, provide summaries and analyses of things that it sees patterns in terms of what it is you're doing. This idea of agentic artificial intelligence, that's what's happening now. I would tell you what it is, but it's still being defined, quite honestly. There are all of these different websites. You get a Wikipedia and they have a, you know, they have an article on it. You could go over here to IBM or AWS and they have, it is out there, it's being talked about, and it's currently being created. And so it's something to think about in terms of what your future holds for you as a researcher and as an academic moving forward, and how you can integrate that into the work that you're doing. You know, you're probably already integrating generative AI in what it is you're doing. I'm offering a new way of integrating it and offer a different vision for how to integrate it. But the other part of it is this idea, this notion that you have an agent that can actually anticipate what it is you're looking at or what it is that your needs might be. Another thing to consider, we talked earlier about word2vec and the creation of this application that transforms text into tensors. There is this new concept, and when I say new, it's not that new. It's about 6 months old now, maybe a year old. Okay. Used to be new was like 5 years old or less or something. Now it's like, you know, what time is it? Okay, so it is like that. So vec2vec is actually is an application that allows for you or allows for the transitioning or the transportation of output from a particular application to another application without making the decisions that limit the output. Here's what I mean by that. When you prompt an AI, it goes to the pseudo random number and it has a bunch of decisions that are made for it that cause it to choose specific words to respond to you with. Before it makes the decision to choose a pseudo random number, it's chosen a cloud of responses that it could give you. That's the vec. So it goes from vec to word, and that word part is your output. But what if you put in a prompt, it created the vec, but then you wanted it to take that vec and use it in a different application. Right now, what happens is when you prompt a computer and you want your one app, a large language model, to work with a different AI, to work with a third AI, it chooses a specific prompt that we as human beings understand, and it takes that output and it puts it in as an input into the next one. And each time you make those choices to choose those specific words, you lose data, you lose information. Vec2Vec allows you to take that response cloud and to transport it into the new application. So it has much more information to deal with as it integrates different applications together. This approach has big implications for agentic AI. That means agentic AI can have different applications, different computers talking in this n-dimensional tensor language that we can't understand. Bearing that in mind. Okay, so anyway, any other questions?
So for your STEM center, with the eye gaze and all that, so apart from text, can you create prompts that it could detect, say, things like body language and tone and things like that?
That is a really interesting part about that is, that's actually a different question. It's such training a separate AI that would have the capacity to be able to do it. But you could use the video that you collect, right? What body language are individuals exposed to? And is that individual, that is exposed to that body language, right, responding to it? Do you notice a difference in their behavior? And so there are a lot of different questions that you can actually answer with this technique with this sort of research facility that we'd like to put together. I want to say that we are in the process of putting together a testbed facility, which is a smaller version of this, sort of boiled down to provide data for our collaborator for the software analysis system. So when that comes online, I will be in touch with you guys to ask you for, if you want to implement any studies with that facility and and if you'd like to collaborate with that. So that's where we stand right now. Do you have any other questions? Yes.
Now, there was a newspaper article where AI was asked, what would you do to take over the world? And I want to know, are all the science fiction novels correct that it is planning on taking over the world? Because the answer it came back with was, I'm going to make you so reliant on me that you won't be able to think for yourself. I'm going to take control of all your jobs so I run everything that you need. Yeah. So sci-fi is the go.
Yeah. So here's the weird thing that that is a big part. So when you train your AI, right? AI has to be trained on stuff, right? And maybe with agentic AI, it doesn't have to be trained on stuff anymore. I don't know, but as it stands right now, AI is trained on stuff, and if it's not trained on it, it doesn't know it exists. Does that make sense? So here's the funny thing about human beings. People who don't know tons of information, right? They don't know that, okay? They can still do amazing things that are related to that. They didn't know that to start with, but they can still do it, right? I was watching this documentary on Australia 2 winning the America's Cup, right? And here's this person, I believe his name is Bruce Lexham or something like that. Ben Lexham, that's it. He came along, he had no formal training in design, right? He just had really good ideas, okay? He gets on a plane, he flies to a facility in Europe, right? Works with the scientists there. He's basically like, look, here are my ideas. So can you guys make this happen for me, right? He's designing the whole thing. They're helping him construct it, right? They construct the winged keel, which completely changes the face of sailing, right? And so that degree of creativity, I don't see the way that AI is designed. That's the one thing human beings do, is they do this kind of stuff. They come out of nowhere with something that's completely like, no one's ever thought of it, heard of it, you know?
Yeah.
And here's the funny thing is that we actually do that a lot, right? With a billion, you know, with many, many billions of people on this planet, right? Thinking about different problems, right? With a billion people thinking about a problem, you're going to come up with some really fascinating solutions, and not all of them are going to work. Maybe only one works, but that's all you need, right? How many wing keels does it take to win the America's Cup?
To manage this, Laura, I have to come up with creative solutions every day, Rob.
Once again, above my pay grade. All right. So anyway, thank you so much, and I look for.
Now, I understand about the creativity, but you know, when AI played the chess champion and came up with a move that nobody ever thought was possible or made any sense, if anything at all, and it was a good. Now I understand that that was internal trial and error, but maybe that's what creativity is.
Maybe it is.
Thinking it through. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you. All
Right.
I'm saying is that it's not black and white, it's a shade of gray.
Oh, it definitely is. I have no doubt. And it's the shade of gray that actually makes the argument I'm making, right? It's that shade of gray that to some degree is very common in human being, is very rare in computing, right? And people are constantly in that gray area. Or at least I am.
For 90+% of human jobs, they're going to involve creativity. There's tons of manual labor and work that people are afraid of AI taking over, I guess.
Yeah, you know, and I look at that, and for me personally, right, I look at that as like, that is to some degree the challenge to each person. Is to find something, right? Is to be in search of that. And there's a difference between like the work that we do to make money and the things that we do because we want to do them. Right. And I see the capacity. There's so much creativity that's lost in like, because people have to do this thing to make money. Is that if we can create a world where we have the human capacity to be able to open us up to do that. So the point that you're making, out before, that people become so dependent upon AI, they won't be able. There will be some that do that, and there's a funny thing about people. There'll be some people that will do that, and then there will some people that go way the other way. And that's part of what it is that we will see a great deal of variation expressing itself, and that's a characteristic of humanity is variation, right? Is difference, is greatness, is this sort of unpredictability, imagination, and creativity that comes out. That in a sense, AI in many ways will free up people to do that if people can choose to take advantage of that capacity as opposed to letting it take over. So thank you.
Would you join me in thanking Rob? Thanks very much.
Thanks, Rob.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Continue eating, and as I said, the next brown bag will be onions at 1 o'clock. Thank you. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you. Bye.